Maamar Basi Legani Tavshin Memches from the Rebbe was Magia at the time, which is based primarily on Perek Yud Ches of the Maamar Basi Legani. So the Rebbe says like this: Basi Legani Achei Sikala. Maybe I'll say it's Muchad Marbali Lula B'Maamar Di Mistalkas Femi Lula Shalai. So the Fridi Rebbe brings in the Maamar Di Sev Medish Rabbim Kaimai Legani Legnuni Lamakam Shayi Kari B'Tchila Dikra Shchina B'Tachteinem Heis. That it says in the Medrash Rabbah Legani Legnuni to go back, that the Shchina is going back to the place that was its primary place at the beginning, because Ikar Shchina started off in the lower worlds. But because of the negative things that were done, the Averis that were done by the generations, the Shechina was pushed away from below to above till the seventh heaven. But afterwards, immediately after, there stood up seven tzaddikim, and they brought the Shechina back down from above to below until Moshe, who was the seventh, and all the sevenths are most dear, came and brought it back down, lamata, down here to this world. And this idea of lamata ba'aretz, bringing down, and the Shechina coming back down into the world, is primarily achieved through what? Not through Matan Torah, which is the first moment that it happens, but through Mishkan that Moshe makes afterwards. The Mishkan is called Maisa Moshe. It relates to, that's what Moshe did. That's what Moshe achieved. Kameshe Kasav, like you see in the pasuk of Asli Mikdash, V'shachanti b'seicham, that they make for me a mikdash and dwell within them. Mamshich ba'Maamar, and the Frierdiker Rebbe continues in the Maamar, Sham shachas ikir shchina lamata, v'shachanti b'seicham nasis al-yidei aveda d'sapcha shechel neira. The drawing down the ikir shchina down here is achieved primarily through the aveda of transforming darkness to light. V'zeu mashab mishkan ksiv vasi says akrashim l'mishkan, and this is what you see, that by the mishkan it says make the krashim for the mishkan. The keresh is sheker, same letters as sheker. V'yidei shemahapchim es ha-sheker de'ilam l'keresh ha-mishkan ha-yidei zenasav. It's by taking the sheker, the falsehood of the world, and transforming it to the krashim of the Mishkan. That's how you bring about the Dira B'Tachteinim, the Iker Shechina down into Tachteinim again. And you could add, this is also why Sheker is the same letters as Kesher. Ki Aveda shal yada nasis v'shchanti b'seicham huloi ba'efen sha'adam ha'evet perish atzmei minyanei eilam ki im sheyesh le'kesher ma'eilam u'mahapech es eilam gufel l'kedusha es hapcha shechel neira. Says the Rabbi, you see this idea that what is Dira B'Tachteinim? It's not removing ourselves from involvement with the world or separating from the world completely, but fakert, the sheker itself becomes the kasher. In other words, the Mishkan itself is made from taking the sheker of the world and working with the sheker of the world and transforming it itself to kedusha. Ishapcha chasheichel neir, transforming the darkness to light. That's how you make the Mishkan, and that's how you bring the Iker Shechina B'Tachteinim. This is further emphasized by the fact that the Mishkan was from Hatzei Shittim, and Shittim comes from the word shtus. Hainu shtus dulumasa. We're talking about negative shtus, negative folly, negative deviation. How do you create the Mishkan? How do you... So that's why the Mishkan is from Maaseh Shittim, because you take the shtus, the lu'umas, the negative shtus, the negative deviation below Tam Vadas, and transform it to shtus Tikdusha, to a positive deviation above Tam Vadas. In order to have a dwelling of the Eibishter within us, in other words, drawing Iker Shechina back down into the world. What do we mean by Iker Shechina? Iker Shechina means Ein Seif, that's completely beyond the worlds altogether. For that, it's not enough to do the Aveda of Kedusha in a normative way of Tam Vadas. You need Aveda of Shtus Kedusha, which is above Tam Vadas. Like it says in the Gemara that the Shtus, the foolishness, helped Saba, helped the old man. What does that mean? The Maamar is who's this talking about? One of the Meiraim that was one of the Gedolei Yisrael Gam Lifnei Zevad Shenikra B'Shem Saba. He was one of the Gedolei Yisrael even before he did his Avodah of dancing with the Hadas by the Chasana. So much so that Reb Zera is calling him Saba, he's calling him the grandfather. In other words, he's already on a very high level. But nonetheless, without his Avodah of Shtus Kedusha, he wouldn't have had Afsik Nahira, Amudah Nahira, the pillar of fire separating between him and everybody else by his Levaya, Val Yidei Avidas Beifin Shtus Kedusha, Shalamayla Mitavadas Nesal Yeser, but Ahani Lishtuse, that through his Aveda of Shtus Kedusha going beyond Tamvadas, he was elevated to a level that beyond what he reached naturally, beyond what he reached on his own. But we know it says Vasal Mikdash. That's not only going on the Mishkan, but it's going also on the Beis Hamikdash, the first one and the second one. But not only that, it's going also on the third Beis Hamikdash that will speedily be rebuilt. And from this, it's understood the just like by the Mishkan. It's from Atzei Shitim and it's making keresh out of sheker. The Aveda is through an Aveda that's beyond limitation, beyond measure. It's through Shtus Kedusha, which is beyond rationale. The same is true how we draw down the essence, the Shechina into the Beis Hamikdash. That also is achieved through the Aveda of Shtus Kedusha, which is beyond limitation. It's dafka through our masein of Avidaseinu, our actions throughout the entire time of Golus. But dafka, the Aveda, that's beyond Tamvedas, the Shtus Kedusha, that's what that's how we're going to bring about the third Beis Hamikdash, that it will be even more elevated than the Mishkan, and then the first two Bati Mikdashes, it'll be the one that's made by the Eibishter himself, completely beyond limitation. Where does that come from? It comes from our Aveda and Shtus Kedusha throughout the time of Golus. That's why Yidden are called Sivis Havaya, the armies of the Eibishter, throughout all of the generations. Why? Because every single Yid is a soldier in Sivis Hashem. He goes out as a part of the army to war, to conquer the world, and to make of it a dira for the Eibishter. Throughout the entire time of Golus, Naved of Shtus Kedusha, that's being a soldier of the Eibishter. And that's why Yidden are called Dafka, an army of the Eibishter. Hulahidis is in order to emphasize that like a soldier, the primary Aveda is Shtus Kedusha. Why? Because the primary Aveda has to be in such a way that we're not making calculations, even not rational calculations. Shtus Kedusha Shalamayla B'Davidas. We have to go dafka in a manner of Shtus Kedusha, beyond rationale, beyond what logic dictates, like an army kivshute, literally, that it's not the job of the simple soldier to be making cheshbenes, but rather to go out and to be mekayim what he was told to do, and to have willingness for Mesiras Nefesh. The Frierdiker Rabbi continues in the Maamar. The Kamoishe b'Melchama b'Gashmi is just like by a physical war. When it comes to winning the war, the king is willing to do everything, to do bizbuz, to spill out all of the treasures, even the treasures that have been gathered through many generations, many years from generation after generation. What does it mean, the Eitzer, the treasure? That even such a treasure that normally not only isn't it used, it's not even used for a great purpose, but you don't even look at it. It's hidden, it's concealed. Nonetheless, when it comes to Netzach, when it comes to victory, being victorious over the opposition, not only are you willing to use the treasures, but he's willing even to spend them, to throw them, to spill them out. The bizbuz hu lamayla mecheshben b'di Dov Wagner. What's the emphasis of bizbuz? It's not just spending what's there, but bizbuz, spending them in a way of waste, almost wastefulness, going beyond any calculation, beyond any limitation. V'atam lo zehu ki hanetzach mushrish be'etzem hanefesh t'shem, be'etzem hanefesh d'sham, be'etzem hanefesh ein shaykh shum cheshbenis. What's the reason why he's willing to have bizbuz haitzris? Because Netzach is rooted in the essence of the soul, and in the essence of the soul, and there's not shaykh any calculations. Al derech zogam l'mayla. So when we're saying by the Eibishter, there's also such a treasure, and there's also bizbuz haitzris, what will it be like Netzach in a person that's mushrish in the essence of the nefesh, where there's no cheshbenis, l'mayla also, shebichdei shetziv zavai yinatzves amalchama, in order that the armies of the Eibishter should be able to win the war. Lichbish asay l'malasei sedira to be able to conquer the world and make of it a dira for the Eibishter. They're given the treasures from above. That what is the treasure of aids? Not only that, and how is the treasure given to them? Not just in an orderly, structured fashion of spending, but rather bizbuz, of complete pouring out, of wastefulness even beyond any calculations. Now, 1 second. Even giving in general, anytime you give somebody something, you're not going to give just a limited amount, you're going to give a complete measure. But even a good eye is still a description of some limitation, some calculation, some measurement. But when we're talking about not just giving ba'in yafa, but giving in a manner of bizbuz, of complete pouring out, ein bahagbalas, in that there's no limitations at all. Why? The reason why there has to be bizbuz. Why are the armies being given all of the treasures and in order to win the war, even in a manner of bizbuz? Because what's the root of Netzach? Netzach is rooted in Pnimis HaKeser. And Sham b'pnimis hakeser ain't shaykh shum cheshbenis. In chachma, bina, das, etc., in the sfiris, or even in keser, but which relates to the sfiris, there's shaykh cheshbenis. You could have a calculation. This is worth it. This isn't worth it. But when you get to Netzach, which is rooted in pnimis hakeser, over there's no calculation. So no matter what it is, there's a willingness to use it in order to win. Hagam shenesinas hayitzrus b'ei from the bizbuz yayidei asarim ufakti amalchama nisiyei Yisrael shebachol. Now, who is the one who gives out the itzris? Who's given this bizbuz? Who's given all of this pouring out all of the treasures? It happens through the ministers, through the generals, the ones in charge of the war, which is a reference to Nisi Yisrael in every generation, including Nisi Dereinu. However, what's the focus? The focus of the bizbuz isn't for the generals, isn't for the ministers, but rather it's for the simple soldiers, the Anshe Chayil, the Sivas Havaya. Why? Shal Yadam Nasa Nitzachim B'Feil. Because they're the ones who actually win the war, right? They're the ones who actually conclude, who actually bring about the victory. וזהו גם מה שהניצחון שיהיה על ידי עבד את סבס הוואי בבית המקדש השלישי. הוא נצחי הוואים לכלי לבועד. That idea is also represented in the fact that the victory that will be brought about through the Aveda of Tzivas Havaya in the third Beis Hamikdash is the eternal Nitzachon, the Mekivan Shanesinas Kayach al Avedasim B'Pnimis HaKeser, because since the Nesinas Kayach for their Aveda is from Pnimis HaKeser, the Pnimis HaKeser in Shaykh in Yinashinuyim, when it comes to Pnimis HaKeser, you can't have any changes. L'chein gam Aveda Tzivas Havaya b'teikev chazak b'li shinuyim. Therefore, the Aveda of Tzivas Havaya is also with a complete strength, without any changes. Because you're talking about something that's brought from Pnimis HaKeser, which is why there's no calculations, and in Pnimis HaKeser there's also no changes. It is what it is. It's the essence, and it doesn't change. So therefore, a nitzachon that's brought about through Tzivas Hashem, through the which is rooted in Midas HaNetzach and Pnimis HaKeser, can't have any changes, can't have any stopping. And that's why once the third Beis Hamikdash is built, it'll never stop, it'll never change. So that's all the Akdama. That's all going over the review of the Maamar of Basi Legani up to Perek Yitches, up to the Perek of that year. Then he continues in the Maamar and Perek Yitches, Perek Shleim the Bishana Zuba Pamashnia, Kiflaim L'Tushia, the Perek that was learned in Tafshin Memches for the second time, Kiflaim L'Tushia, the Biro Inyan Shesherish Hanetzach B'nei Mesakeser Yuvan Api Mashikasav V'gam Netzach Yisrael Yishakav L'Inachim Kleid Adam L'Inachim. In order to understand this idea that the Sherish of Netzach is in B'nei Mesakeser, we'll understand it based on what it says in the Pasuk Netzach Yisrael Yishaker V'Leinachem, that the Netzach, the eternal of the Yidden, meaning the Eibush there, La Yishaker V'Leinachem, won't lie, won't change his mind, won't regret. Ki La Adam Hu Leinachem, because he's not Adam. That Adam is shaykh to Leinachem, but he's to the level of La Adam. He's not a man to regret. What does that mean? It says the Maamar, the reason why Netzach Yisrael won't lie, won't change his mind, won't regret, is because the root of Netzach is the level of Lo Adam, and Lo Adam isn't shaykh to Nichum, to changing its mind. The Inyan Nichumim v'charata shayach rak b'chinas Adam. The idea of Nichumim, of regret or changing the mind, that's only shayach in the level of Adam. And since Netzach is rooted in Lo Adam, therefore it's not shayach to changing. What's the reason for that? Ki Adam, because the level of Adam is a reference to the whole seer of Adam, which is Meichenu Midas, which is the intellect and emotions. Hainu Midas shall be Seichel v'Seichel ha'shayich l'Midas. The Midas that we're talking about are Midas that are based on Seichel, and the Seichel that we're talking about is a Seichel that's Shayich to Midas, because they relate to one another. Ulochein Shayich be'Shinoi, and therefore they're capable of changing. Why are they capable of changing? The Kivan Shamidis the Adam Mapi Seichel Lochen Kshanasa Shineba Seichel Mishnana Mamidis. Since you're talking about midis that are based on Seichel, so when you're going to change the way you understand something, change your thought process about it, you're going to change also the way you feel about it. And not only is that true of midis and the Seichel that lead to the midis, but even Ratzin that's higher than Seichel, which seems not to be based on Seichel, but nonetheless, Ratzin is also in the tzir of a person, in the tzir of Meichna Midis. Because within will, you have two parts. You have the midas, the way it makes the person feel, and then you have the reason for it, which, while it's not seichel in a normal sense, of revealed seichel, because Ratzon's higher than seichel, but nonetheless, there's an element of seichel contained within Ratzon also, which is that you have tam kamos, you have already the idea that there's a hidden reason that leads a person to want in a certain direction. It's not a revealed reason, it's not revealed seichel, that comes after Ratzon, but there's a certain hidden concept that leads the person to understand things in a particular way, which is why he wants a particular thing. Mikivan sheseichel gam tam komos hu davra mishtana, and since seichel at the end of the day, even a tam komos, even a hidden reason, so it's not revealed seichel, but nonetheless it already relates to seichel, and therefore it's possible for it to change. He'll have new information, a new way of understanding that'll lead to having a new subconscious, even a new tam komos that'll lead to a different ratzon. Lachen kishanasa shini betam komos mishtana ratzon midish beratzon. If the seichel within the Ratzin, meaning the hidden reason that causes him to want that particular thing, will change, then the midas of the Ratzin, the expression of what he wants, will also change, and he'll end up wanting something different. But that idea that it's based on a tam kamos, and therefore it's expressed in the midas of Ratzin, that's only a chitzenius Ratzin. Which in the expressions of Lamaila and the Eibishter, that would be chitzenius Akaser, which is chitzenius Ratzin. But when you're talking about the essence, the pnimius of the keser itself, the ein sham bechinas midis v'lei tam kamos, that's not broken down. That's higher even than ratzon. So there's not the midis of the ratzon. There's not the hidden reason of the ratzon. So over there's also a ratzon, but that ratzon isn't mishnana. It's not possible to change because since it's not broken down into even the way seichel and midis are in ratzon in their higher expression, there's no hidden reason even for why the person wants this. So therefore, it's not shaykh to be ein shaykh shamin nichum charata. You can't have regret. You can't have changing the mind because it's not based on any building blocks. It's pashut. It's etzem. V'yesh leimar. The Rebbe points out this that the Friedrich Rebbe points out and emphasizes the fact that in Pnimius HaKeser and Pnimius HaRatzon there isn't midas, which doesn't seem to be relevant because what did he say causes Nichumin, causes Nechama, the Seichel, and the reason why midas changes because the Seichel that they're based on it changes. The reason why the midas of the Ratzon will change is because the Tam Kombos is changing. So theoretically, why does he have to mention that there's no midas in Pnimius HaKeser? The emphasis seems to be on the fact that there's no seichel, there's no tam komus in pnimis HaKeser, in pnimis HaRatzon. Even though we just explained that they regret the changing of one's mind happens because of the change that happens in the reason. So the fact that the pnimis HaRatzon, that the pnimis HaKeser can change, doesn't have regret and charata seems to be because there's no tam komus, because there's no even hidden reason. It has nothing to do with whether or not there's midas in pnimius haratzon. Nonetheless, the Friedrich Rebbe emphasizes that there's also no midas in pnimius haratzon and pnimius hakeser. Why? Because understanding that there's no midas either in Pnimius HaRatzon enables us to understand better the idea of Lei Adamu Li Nachem. Why? The Lei Rakshe B'Pnimius HaKeser in Siba Le'inyan HaNechama V'Shinoi. The baratzon sheish leitam given shetamu davar mishtan arishini atamu siba lishini aratzon mashen keratzon shalamayim lamatam in siba sheishtan. Not by saying that there's no midas in pnimius aratzon. There's two parts here. There's the tam kamos in the ratzon, in chitzenius haratzon, and there's the midas in chitzenius haratzon. Neither one of them is there in pnimius haratzon. Why is it important to emphasize that neither one is there in pnimius haratzon? The seichel within the ratzon is the reason why the ratzon is mishtana, the reason why it changes. If there's a tam komos, if there's a hidden reason leading to the ratzon, then when that tam komos changes, there'll be a reason for the ratzon to change. Since there's no tam komos in pnimius haratzon, there's no reason ever for Pnimius HaRatzon to change. Ela Yiseda Mizu, but by emphasizing there's also no midas in the Pnimius HaRatzon, he's saying even more than that. Not only could there not be a reason for it to change, meaning the Tam Komos isn't there, so there's no so there's no change in the Tam Komos, so there's no reason for the Ratzon to change in the first place. But Einay Gam Begeder Shinoi, the whole idea of change, the reason for the change is because the seichel is mishtana. But where does the change actually take place? The change actually takes place in the midas. If there's no midas in pnimius haratzon, that means not only is there no seichel, no tam kamos, there's no reason for change, there's no concept of change, there's no ability to change altogether. The beginnes on midas, because in midas, mikivan shebe midas yeshna beis kavin chesed v'din shaykh sheyeshina mechesed l'din v'din l'chesed. Midas are essentially broken up into two general categories, right and left, chesed and din, and therefore there's possibility of shinoi. Once there's midas, there's the ability to change from this midah to the other, from chesed to din, from din to chesed. Similarly, in all of the two kavin. Mashenkin bepnimis hakesed ein sham beginnes midas. But in Pnimis HaKeser, there's no midas. What does it mean that there's no midas? It's beyond the whole definition of right and left, of chesed and din. The less small bahiyatika can move by Maamar. Like the Maamar brings down, there's no left in Atik. In other words, there's no kavin b'chlal. There's no definition b'chlal. And if there's no definition of separation, there's no ability to change because there's no other side to change to. Less smaller, there's no left. Everything is right. If there was the ability to change, still, if there was no tam komos, so there's no reason to change because there's no seichel that it's built upon, and therefore there's nothing leading it to change. But not only that, says the Rebbe, the Friedrich Rebbe is being medayik, there's no midas in Pnimis HaRatzon either, which means there's no ability, there's no concept to change because there's no other side to change to. And therefore, not only will there not be a reason for change because there's no tam komos in Pnimis HaRatzon, there's no ability, there's nothing, no concept of change altogether. That's the meaning of Netzach Yisrael won't change because Loi Adamu. The Netzach Yisrael b'chinas Loi Adam Pnimis HaKeser. Netzach Yisrael is on the level of Loi Adam. He's on the level of Pnimis HaKeser. K'disa b'zayar al pasuk in Eliyahu v'liyishan shemi Yisrael sheb'chinas ayin achas shalamayla mishnei einayim ayin achas ta'atika. As it says in the Zayar Le'yonim V'liyishan Shemi Yisrael, that the Eibishter is one eye is higher than two eyes. It's the one eye of Atik. In other words, the Loi Adam is the Pnimis HaKeser is Atik. And B'b'chinezu ein shayich sheina ina p'kichad le'noim. Not only does the Eibishter not sleep, but it's not possible for there to be sleep because it's an open eye that never sleeps. In other words, the Friedrich Rebbe is emphasizing the same thing when it says Loi Adam uli Nachem. It's not only that he's not going to change because there's no reason for change, because there's no tam komos, there's no seichel in Pnimis, even hidden seichel in Pnimis HaKeser, in Pnimis HaRatzon, but also there's no ability to change, so to speak, because there is no other side. There's no concept of change altogether, and therefore not only won't there be a reason to change, there won't be the idea of change altogether. Now, even though Atik is higher than the whole seer of a person, higher than the whole idea of kavin, of different sides, and therefore the whole concept of change doesn't exist there. Mikol Makim, nonetheless, says the Rebbe, Mizeh she'in da'atik l'mayla mekavin, Baba Maamar, Behemshich l'mashim avur lifnei zeh, Basi ha'perek ha'inyin da'adam sh'adam u'meichen u'mides. Nonetheless, here he's going to go a step further. Yes, Atik is beyond change, because Atik is removed from the level of Adam, the level of Meichin and Mides that exists in Chitzenius HaKeser and Chitzenius HaRatzon and Arich. But in Atik it doesn't exist, and therefore it's not shaykh to have change. But nonetheless, since we use the term Atik, removed from, and since it comes in the Maamar Behemshich to the explanation of Adam, and it explains that it's Loi Adam, it's beyond these levels, that means it still relates to them, but it's removed from them. Hainu, that means the Inyan Atik, that the idea of Atik. That Atik is Malashon Natak V'nivdal. The whole word Atik means removed from, separated from. Hushenatak Mitzir Adam. The level of Atik is that it's removed from, it's separated from the definition of Adam. Muvan Mizeh, from that it's understood. Shegam Atik Yesh Le'shayches Lebchines Adam. That Atik also has some connection to the level of Adam, because it's removed from it. V'yeseder Mizu, not only that, even more so. Since he explains at the beginning of the parak this idea of Adam, not only about the seichel and midas that exist in Chitzenius HaKeser, and that Loi Adam, that Atik is removed from, the Pnimis HaKeser is removed from it, but first he explained the way it is in the person, in Adam HaTachtin, in the seichel and midas that exist in the Ratzon of the person. That means that Atik, even Atik the way it is Lamaila, since it comes in continuation to the explanation of Seichel and Midas the way they are in the person, so not only is Atik removed from and therefore Shaykh in some way to Adam HaElyon, but it's removed removed from and therefore shaykh in some way, even to Adam HaTachton. Dagam she'atik hu darga tachtayna shemein seif, even though atik, generally speaking, we say arich is the first level of creation, in a sense, is the beginning of Eilemis, whereas atik is the last level of godliness of Ein Seif. Kedisa Beitz Chaim, like it says in Eitz Chaim, Mikol Makem hu shaykh gam lo Adam HaTachton kanal, nonetheless, it's removed from Adam HaTachton. That means it relates in some way, even to Adam HaTachton. Now, usually it explains that there's two different levels in atik. There's atik yaimin, atik that's removed from days, which means that in some way it's shaykh already to Eilemis. And then there's plain atik, which implies that it's not atik from yaimin, which is a higher level that's not shaykh to Eilemis altogether. Nonetheless, says the Rabbi, since we're this idea that we're saying that atik is shaykh even to Adam HaTachton isn't only in the lower level in atik yaimin, elegam atik stam, even when it says atik plain. Dagam atik stam atik yaimin, even though atik plain is higher than atik yaimin. The Pirush atik yaimin ushanetak mi yaimin. Hainu sheyesh l'shaychus liyaimin el shanetak mi. Where, because the meaning of atik yaimin is that it relates to yaimin, relates to days, relates to creation, to structure, to definition. But it's removed from them. Mashenkin atik stam ulamayla mi yaimin. But atik plain doesn't relate to yaimin even to use it as a reference point of what it's removed from. So therefore it's higher. Nonetheless, mikol makom mikivin shenikar b'shem atik. Nonetheless, since still its name is atik. And Pirush atik hu shenetak, the meaning of atik, even atik stam is still that it's removed, it's separated from. That means that even though it's not using a particular reference point, it still must have some relationship with whatever it is that it's separated from. Even atik plain, the fact that its name is atik means it's removed, which if it's removed from something, which means it has some context, some relationship with whatever it's removed from, even if it's not even mentioning what it's removed from, because it's not a direct point of reference. The Rebbe says, from this, let's explain Melukat Levi Yitzchak from the Rebbe's father. He has a whole discussion about these different levels of Atik Yemin and Atik of Atik, the Atika da Atikin, and the whole discussion over there about the two different levels of Atik relates to what we just said about the difference between Atik Yemin and Atik Sam. But since, as we said, when the Friedrich Rebbe explains in the Maamar the idea of Adam, he doesn't just explain it in Adam Elyon, but also in Adam HaTachton, also in Seichel and Midas within the person, and their relationship to Ratzon within the person. That means that the level that Atik is removed from, which means that it has some connection from, because it's referring to it as removed from it, is true not only of Adam Elyon, but even of Adam HaTachton. And even more so, says the Rebbe, the inyan zeh she'atik shayach gam l'Adam HaTachton u'b'chol hadarges atik, gam b'pnimius atik. This idea that we're saying Atik is shaykh to what it's removed from, which includes all the way down till Adam HaTachton, is true not only in the level of Atik Yemin and the level of Atik Stam, but even in Pnimius Atik, even in the essence, the innermost aspect of Atik. Even though normally we talk about the Gimel Reishin Sheberadla, the Pnimius Atik, that this is complete, this is Ein Seif, this is godliness that's contained within Atik. Sometimes even in Chassidus we refer to Pnimius Atik as Atzmus, as the essence of the Eibishter himself. Mikol Makim, nonetheless, Mikivan Shenikra B'Shem Atik Shepiru Shenetak, says Rebbe, but once you use the word Atik, even if you're talking about Pnimius Atik, even if you're talking about the highest level of Atik, but since at the end of the day it uses the word Atik, and Atik means removed from, that means that already there's something it's removed from, which means that there's some relationship with what it's been removed from. And as we said before, since in the Maamar he talks about Adam HaTachton also as what Atik is removed from, That means that even Pnimius Atik has on some level, some relationship, some connection already with even Adam HaTachton, because it's removed from Adam HaTachton. It's Atik, even Pnimius Atik is removed, is Netak from Adam, from everything it's removed from, all the way down to Adam HaTachton, to the person the way he is down here, and therefore that means there's some relationship within them, between them. Even though we're emphasizing a negative relationship, that removed from the lack of relationship, but the lack of relationship shows that there's some connection, some erech, some way of some relationship between the two, that we're emphasizing how removed it is. This is also understood from this that the Mittler Rebbe says in Teres Chaim, when he's explaining this idea of Atik, that's beyond any kavin, that's beyond any directions, beyond any separations. As we said before, one eye that's beyond separation into Chesed and Gvura. In the Chesed Gvura shebechinas Adam. In the Mittler Rebbe's Teres Chaim, Maamar and Teres Chaim, he also first talks about the separation of Chesed Gvura that happens because of Meichin, meaning the directions, the general separation of the two lines, of the two sides of Chesed Gvura, the way they are in a person. V'shemitzada Meichin afsher sheisa svara tishtana v'tesapech v'kama pa'amim mischus l'chayv v'mechav l'schus inyan chama v'shinu shebechinas Adam. Because midas are based on seichel, and Chesed and Gvura are divided by Seichel, by Meichin. Therefore, a person could go from Chesed to Gvura, and Gvura to Chesed, from Schus to Chayv, and Chayv to Schus, back and forth, because as he learns an idea, and changes his mind, and learns more information, and develops the idea further, so it's Shaykh within a person to have Nechama and Shinui. V'she'inyan zeh shebechinas Adam inyanes Chalkos to Chesed Gvura v'inyan and Nechama v'Shinui gam ba'Adam HaTachton. This idea and the level of Adam that exists in Adam HaElyon, within the seer of Adam Lamaila, exists also within Adam HaTachton, that a person has the division into Chesed and Gvura, and Seichel is what determines that division into Chesed and Gvura, and therefore he's able to go back and forth and change his mind. V'yesera mizu, and even more so, she calls them of word Shama Lapask v'Yeber Hashem Erdana v'Era HaKatzah Kasa D'Staim. Then where does it, what does it say, this whole discussion about Adam HaTachton in connection to, with the Eibishter saying, let us go down and see, is Sedaim really as bad as it's at the Tzaka that we're getting from Sedaim, which is Ayirida, the Adam HaElyon, Liris Sakasa, this time, when Adam HaElyon, when the Eibishter Kavyachal is coming down to see the cry of Sedaim. Shemizem Muvan Shigam Adugma Lazem Adam HaTachton Gam Kamaishu Nimsa B'matzav Yard B'Yeser. What does that tell you? You might have thought that the relationship to Adam HaTachton, to the way these ideas are expressed in a person, is only the way it's expressed in a person on the highest level. But since the Mittler Rebbe and the Maamar talks about this idea of nichumin within the person, the way it is in the person when it's talking about going down to see the tzaka, the cry of Sedaim, that means that this division of shinui, of this relationship of Adam HaElyon to Adam HaTachton, to the division and separation and change of mind that exists in Adam HaTachton, is even to Adam HaTachton the way they are on the level of Sedaim in the lowest level. And it's only after that introduction of understanding shinui and nichumim, of change of mind, the way it is in the person, because of this chalkos to kavin of chesed and gvura, and because it's nishtana al pi haseichel, and then the way that relates higher and higher. But after akdama zuba habir binyan atik, it's after that introduction that the Mittler Rebbe explains this idea about atik. What does that show you? Again, like we said in the previous eyes, hainu de'inyan atik hushenetak b'b'chinezu da adam shemevar lifnei. Since he's explaining this idea of Atik that he's separated from. So that means that we're relating to Atik as separated from even this level of Adam. The level of Adam that existed in Sedaim, the level of Adam that he was talking about there. The Mizem moving from this is understood. Sheinin Atik shaykh gam lo Adam HaTachton gam k'maishu b'matzav yared b'yaser. Not only, like we said before from the Friedrich Rebbe's Maamar, that's the fact that it's talking about Atik related to Adam HaTachton. That that means that Atik relates to even Adam. Atik is natak from, even Atik on the highest level, relates to all the way down to Adam HaTachtin, but in the Mikler Rebbe's Maamar, you see that it relates all the way down to Adam HaTachtin on the lowest level, the way he is in Sodom. And this is understood also from what the Rebbe Marash explains in the famous Hemshech Mayim Rabim by the change that happens by the Eibishter Kaviyachol, by spelling the smell of the carbon after the Mabul. And the idea of Atik is that he's separated from that, which means again that you're seeing that Atik is separated not just from Adam HaTachtin, but even from Adam HaTachtin, the way he relates to the way he was in the time of the Mabul, which is coming from the tshuva from Adam on the lowest level. And not only that, there's another element. In Mayim Rabim over there, the Rebbe Marash explains, when he's continuing to explain this idea of Atik, he explains Leirak binyan kutzei shel Yud, va'afilu Leirak binyan Yud, elagam be'inyan hey d'shem Havaya. Goes on over there to explain that this relates to the hey, when he's talking about Atik, he relates it to the hey of Shem Havaya, not only to the Yud, and or you might think only the Atik is in the Kutzei Shel Yud, it's above Yud Kei Vav Kei. It's in the Shpitzel of the Yud, which relates to Keser, which relates to Pnimius Keser. Or maybe even the Yud, because the Yud is Nekuda, so maybe it relates to the way it is in Pnimius Keser. But he explains this idea of Atik also even in the Hey of Shem Havaya. V'chei movin mamashikos v'admar rashab nishbas eid mehemshech ayin beis. The Atik lashon zakein. This is also understood from what the Rebbe Rashab explains in Ayin Beis, that Atik is the word of Atika also means old. That this idea of Atik that doesn't change, relates or is connected, is similar to an old man, literally. The Rebbe Rashab explains over there that just like an old person isn't affected, it doesn't get excited and doesn't change from something that goes against his rason, as he might have in his youth. Similarly, Atik comes also in the word Atika from old, not only from Netak, because it's a level that's not shaykh to be changed, that's not shaykh to get excited. The fact that he compares Atik to literally an old man, the way it is down here in the physical person, that shows you that it's natural that Atik relates somehow, connects somehow to Adam HaTachtin, to a person down here also. Even more so. Not only is Atik shaykh to Adam HaTachtin the way it is in Atik in a Zaken Kipshute, but even to a child, even beforehand. Because already from the beginning of Adam HaTachtin, a certain person is created, he's shaykh to becoming old. And since he's shaykh to becoming old, therefore he already relates to the way he is when he's old. So if Atik relates to Zaken in Adam HaTachtin, then he relates to youth in Adam HaTachtin also. The behavior, the way he is when he's young, will automatically result in his behavior the way he is when he's old. As it says, Gam Ki Yaskin, that when he gets old, he won't turn away from the behavior he had when he was younger. If that's the case, then a nar already relates to a zakin. It's just a question of time. It's just time that needs to pass. The point being that Sai from Basi Legani, Sai from the Mittler Rebbe's Maamar, from the Rebbe Marash's Maamar, and from the Rebbe Nishmas Eiden's Maamar, you see this idea that Atik, even though the whole idea of Atik is removed, but Atik and all the levels of Atik are shaykh to all the level to Adam, are shaykh in a way to Adam, and not only to Adam, but even to Adam HaTachtin, and even to Adam HaTachtin, the way he is on the lowest level. And you can add the days that Shana see and Vat Quit Smuchad Marbali Lula. Koso Biro in Yanu Manal, she a moving in the Attic Shaik Lotamataktin by the Rebbeim up to and including the Friedrich Rebbe, writing and explaining these ideas that Attic relates also to a person the way he is down here in this physical world. In days and it says they're not just restricting, as it were, the highness of the level of Atik, that Atik already relates in some way to what it's removed from, but they're also doing the opposite. They're uplifting Adam Atachten, that we have the ability to have a Shaykhis to Atik. Not only are we able to have a relationship with the level of Atik, but to all levels of Atik, even to Pnimius Atik. Especially according to what's known about the Alter Rebbe. From this is understood that it's also true of all the Rebbeim that follow, that filled his place. To be'esha amaray kasav al derech al dvarei zeinin madrega. In Eloizu bavad shu atzmei hayaz b'matzav zeh ela shagam paul ala chasidim. There's known the stories about the Alter Rebbe that when he was writing about specific areas of Chassidus, when it was uplifted that all the Chassidim were besimcha, when it was in a kav of merirus that affected the mood of all the Chassidim around. In other words, his writing Chassidus affected all of the, not only himself but all of the Chassidim. If that's the case, how much more so that when the Rebbeim write and explain this idea that Atik relates even to Adam Atachten, they're increasing and highlighting that ability within each one of us to be able to relate to all levels of Atik. But what does that mean at the end of the day? The whole idea of Atik is that it's removed. So fine, we made a point that Atik is removed from, so it has some relationship. And so as he went through all the way from the highest level of Atik, all the way to the lowest level of Adam Atachten. But at the end of the day, what does that mean? That Atik is connected to Adam Atachten. So Yuvan will understand this. Says Shiur, the Shaykh is to Atik lo Adam Atachten, this relationship that Atik has to Adam Atachten. Now, Peter is Rav Magid al Maimer Azal, Dama Alamayla Mimcha. According to what the Magid teaches on Dama Alamayla Mimcha, know that what is above you, that he interprets it you should know that Ma'alamayla, that everything that is above is Mimcha, everything comes from you. Peter Shadman Azak and Stal Rebbe explains this. What does that mean, that everything that is above is from you? You might have thought that just means that through that person's Aveda there's added light, so everything above is affected by you, or changes by you, and or the similar. Ella, but rather the Alter Rebbe explains that it's not just that it changes by you, but the whole existence of everything that's above is only achieved through Avedis Adam because of you. Now says the Rebbe, if you're medayik, what the Magid says, he says everything above, everything is from you. That means not only the way you'd understand it simply. That means that it's not only with relation to the Sfiras, to the Ilmas, the way they relate to Ishtalshalos, that they come from the person. Everything that exists, everything is from you. That means Atik, what's removed from you, is also from you. On the contrary, the more essential, the more real it is, the more it's going to be true that it's from you. This is true even of Atik, even what's higher than Atik. What does that mean? How's that possible? Because everything that exists, even in the highest spiritual level, it is brought into existence at some point, something from nothing. Not only everything that exists after Tzimtzum, they were only created through the Tzimtzum, and therefore they were brought into being from nothing, because there was a moment of a chalo and makam pano, you have an empty space. Even those levels that are before Tzimtzum, even the very highest levels of Erd. If they're not Atzmos, if they're not the essence of the Eibishter themselves, then they were brought into being through Atzmos, through the essence. Uveloshen Rambam, as the Rambam says at the very beginning of Mishnah Torah, Shekol HaNimtzaim, the Bechol HaNimtzaim Nichlu Gam Eretz Achinalim, Le'nimtzu Alam Amitas Imatzei, that everything that exists means even the highest level of earth, were only brought into being from the truth of the Eibishter's existence. Which means, Amitas Imatzei Atzmos, the truth of the Eibishter's existence is Atzmos, Shemitziusi Me'atzmos V'nei Olam Eizilo, Shekod Melechas Shalom, as the Rambam says that his existence is from his essence and isn't an effect that's brought into being by some cause that came before him. From Atzmos, everything else was brought into being. Says the Rebbe, that means that means that the way in which, since everything was brought into being at some point from Atzmos, there was a moment it didn't exist, and then it's brought into being. Even the highest level, earth, that's Lifnei Atzimtzum, is brought into being through Avedas Adam. Because of Avedas Adam, because of the person's Aveda. Why? Because everything that exists from above, even the very highest levels of earth, the fact that they exist and they're not the essence of the Eibishter means it's already a descent from the essence of the Eibishter, from the light of the Eibishter's face, so to speak. And there's no elevation in them, there's no purpose in them for themselves, because they're a Yerida, and a Yerida can't be the purpose. What was the point of why they were brought into being? Even the Erein Seif Shalifnei Hatzimtzum, which is long before there's Avedas Adam, but the whole reason it was brought into being, it's for the sake of something. Well, for the sake of what? So that there should be a savos of the physical world. Shein Tachtan Lamata B'menu, Dafka, the lowest world. Shebai Dafka B'Elam Azal, Yidei Avedas Adam, Maskel Inyan Aliyah. Because the only place that you have Aliyah, the only place you have elevation, none of that happens in all the Ilmas Alyanim. All the Ilmas Alyanim are only a Yerida. The whole reason for creation, the first time you have Aliyah, the first time you reach a higher level, is Dafka in Eilam Hazat Tachten, Dafka through Avedas Adam. And that means that even the existence of the various highest Erein Seif Shalifnei Hatzimtzum, the only reason it exists, because it can't exist for itself, because it's a Yerida. The only reason it exists is for the Aveda that the person's going to do. Only when eventually there comes about an Eilam Hazat Tachten, and a person does his Aveda, and the person's Aveda brings an elevation, brings an Aliyah, so that Aliyah is the purpose of this Havos, is when you achieve the Kavanah of why everything was brought into existence. In the first place, they're also elevated as a result. That means that is Havos, the Chol Inyan Shalamayla, bringing into being of everything that exists above. The fact that they're brought into being constantly from nothing to something, like the Baal Shem Tov famously says that everything is brought into being. It constantly, Hisavos Tmidis, constantly, every single moment, there's a new energy that's bringing into being even that highest iron. And what's causing it to happen? The only reason it's happening is because of the Aliyah that'll eventually happen through Avedas Adam, which means that it's also brought into being Mimcha because of the person. That's the case. According to this, we can understand what the Tzemach Tzedek explains. The pasuk says in Shmuel, "The is the God of knowledges, and there weren't prepared any aliles, any libels, any reasons. Now, there's two different ways of reading that pasuk. Either loy niskenu aliles, the way we read it is v'loy, for him niskenu aliles, all the causes were prepared, all the reasons were created. But it's the ksiv, the way it's written in the pasuk is v'loy niskenu aliles. There weren't created for him any causes. What does that mean? How could it be both with a vav, meaning for him it was done, and with an aleph and it wasn't done? So it explains the deis lashon rabim im das alien v'das tachten kel deis avaya. The multiple knowledges, multiple ways of perspectives is das alien and das tachten. The das tachten yesh beis chalkas chesed gvura. In das tachten, looking at the world from below to above, there is a separation already of chesed and gvura, and therefore there's different ways that things can go. Where amashenkin das alien ulamaylam is chalkas, but from das alien, looking at it from the perspective from above, it's beyond any separation. Ki das alien ubatik shein sham din. Like we said before, das alien is atik. There's no din. There's no right and left. There's only right. So it explains that both are true. It's true, and lay with a vav is also true, and both of them exist. Where? In the two different days. Lay bevav u'b'das tachten shesham niskanu aliles. Lay with a vav, for him there were prepared the different causes. That's in das tachten, where there were different perspectives. V'lay ba'alef u'b'das alien shesham lay niskanu aliles. Lay with an aleph is in das alien. There are no different causes and effects. She'ein ma'aseh b'nei adam aliles negei Hashem, because what people do, the aliles, all the different works and different things we do, don't matter at all. So Tzemach Tzedek explains, really it's not two different perspectives, but they're all one truth. How do you explain them being one truth? To say that there's two different perspectives, that makes sense, but how do you say that they're both true together in one truth? Since Atik, which is higher than the vision, also is achieved through Avedas Adam. Therefore, the loy niskenu, the das elyon, the no alilais, also relates to the person, even to the Adam Atachten, where there does seem to be separation, because the existence of the no separation is for the sake of the yes separation. You could connect this idea that das alien in the level of Lei Adam is connected with das tachten in the level of Adam. With what the Tzemach Tzedek explains there. Then what does it mean, Keil Deis Havaya? The Keil Havaya mechaber shtei hadeyas, that Keil and Havaya are what combines the two different deyas and makes them one. What does that mean? Yesh Leimer, you could say it's Zeu Gama Shavid Zadam Ibchal Gimel and Yanim. A person's Aveda generally is in these three areas. Sur Meira, stay away from bad. Aseitev, do good. And Bakish Shalom, which is Aveda of Teira. The Mekivan Shadam Obetzir Gimel Kavin Lachengam Avedasi Gimel Kavin. Since a person is in two Kavin, is in the Kav of Chesed and Kav of Gevura. And then the Kav of Teferes, or Aveda also is in those three Kavim. But here he relates, what does that mean? The Beis, Kavin Sur Meira Vaseitev Shayachim Lishtei Adeyas. The two directions of do good and stay away from bad. Sur Meira will be in das tachten and Aseitev will be das elyon. Vaveda the Bakish Shalom, the Shalom Atera Kavim say you achibur tishtei adeyas. But what's Bakish Shalom? What's the third kav that's bringing the two kavim together, bringing the two deyas together? Achibur the Lei Adam im Adam, connecting Lei Adam with Adam, like we said before. But even the third level, which connects the Lei Adam with the Adam, is still shaykh to the Adam. Why? Because it only happens because of his Aveda. Kel ma shalamayla kel mimcha. Now, like we said before, because the Nesiim revealed all of this to us. This gives even more to this, it adds even more to the Nesinas Kayach that was given to each and every one of the army of Hashem. And especially this army of Hashem in this generation, the 7th generation of the Alter Rebbe, the 9th generation of the Baal Shem Tov, and immediately this very generation, this last generation of Golus, becomes the first generation of Gula, which is the Deir HaSiri, the 10th generation. Shahilach lekras Mashiach Tzidkenu, that goes towards Mashiach. Shavedas etzia b'teikav b'li shinuyim, that this gives us the kayach, that our Aveda could be in a manner of Atik, that even down here in Adam HaTachten, where there is shinuyim, nonetheless, it should connect to Lei Adam Uli Nachim. should be with a full strength that isn't shaykh to any changes. Because as we explained, even the Adam, Hatachtin on the lowest level is still connected to Atik, which isn't shaykh in it any changes. Even though our Aveda down here in the physical world has to have this ischalkus, has to have the separation into the kavim, into all three of Sur Meira Asete and Bakeshalim, Mikol Makim, Tzarech Shia Bazat Takev, Shemitzad Atik, Shalamayim Mekavim. Nonetheless, our Aveda has to have in it the strength that comes from Atik, that's beyond any separation and definition. Like we explained before, about the relationship, about the connection of Adam with Lo Adam, especially on the Yom Hilula on Yud Shvat. Because then all the actions and teachings and Aveda of the Bali Lula are all fully revealed, but if in the Pale Yeshuis B'Kerev Haaretz in a manner that it affects Yeshuis within B'Kerev Haaretz, which means Shegam B'Kerev Haaretz, even within the land, in Ervas Haaretz, with itself, Nimshachim u'mizgalim ha'Yeshuis shelamaylam ishtalshlos, they are drawn down and reveal the Yeshuis the way they are beyond the ishtalshlos. Especially from the Yom Hilula. That year went straight into Shabbos. It was on Friday, and now when the Maamar was said was in the time of Mincha of Shabbos, which is Raiva the Chol Raivan B'chinas Atik, which is the level of Atik in the third in the Mincha of Shabbos, in the afternoon of Shabbos. Then there's added even more so. And then it's in his kayach that's given to each and every yid. Tzivus Avaya, the army of the Eibishter. La'aved Avidase b'teikabel ishinuyim, to do our Aveda with strength, without any changes. And through doing that Aveda in the level of Lo Yadamu Li Nachim, then we're able to draw Iker Shechina down to Tachteinim K'may Shaya B'tchilas Abriya, like it was at the beginning of creation. Va'id Yaiser, and we do even more than the way it was Iker Shechina B'tachtenim at the beginning. Because even though at the beginning of creation also it says tell this male, tell this with an extra vav, with two vavs, that the world was created perfectly, nonetheless tell this peretz, tell this male, tell this male, when it says tell this peretz, which peretz is the grandfather of Mashiach, it says tell this full, and over there it's an even higher than the tell this mali, meaning an even higher perfection than there was at the beginning of creation. So much so that then there'll be also the revelation of Pnimius Atik, that didn't happen before. Will only happen when Mashiach comes. By the Gula Mitzvah Shlema through Mashiach Tzidkenu. And just lahir, I believe this. This Basi Legani was the last Basi Legani that the Rebbe said to date, and presumably also the last. No, not the last. It was Magia, but the last Basi Legani that was said, and also Muga. So this Taikef B'li Shinuyim continues throughout all the darkest times, even the lowliest times of Galus, and brings us to the Gili of Pnimius Atik of Mashiach Tzidkenu, Taikef Miyad Mamash.